In recent decades, the world has witnessed a profound shift in the relationship between governments and their citizens. While democracy and individual freedom have long been championed as hallmarks of Western societies, there is growing evidence that these values are being eroded under the guise of security, social harmony, and technological progress. Governments, particularly those in the West, are increasingly adopting measures that enhance surveillance, limit free speech, and tighten economic control, often justified by appeals to public safety, inclusivity, or economic stability. This video explores how these trends manifest, focusing on the curtailment of free speech to appease certain groups, the push for digital currencies to enable greater control, and specific examples such as the United Kingdom's aggressive surveillance and punitive social media policies. It also examines the inexorable rise of taxation and the broader implications for personal liberty. Freedom of speech has long been regarded as a cornerstone of democratic societies, enabling individuals to express dissent, challenge authority, and engage in robust debate. However, in recent years, Western governments have increasingly sought to limit this right, often under the pretext of protecting so-called marginalized groups or maintaining social cohesion. While these justifications may appear noble, they frequently serve as a sinister mechanism for silencing dissent and consolidating power. One prominent example of this is the growing pressure to censor speech deemed offensive to immigrant communities, particularly in Europe. In countries like Germany and France, hate speech laws have been expanded to include expressions that could be interpreted as Islamophobic or xenophobic. While the intent may ostensibly be to foster inclusivity, these laws should be criticized for their vagueness, which allows authorities to selectively target individuals who criticize immigration policies or cultural practices or whatever the government deems offensive. For instance, in Germany, the Network Enforcement Act requires social media platforms to remove quote-unquote illegal content within 24 hours, often leading to the suppression of legitimate political discourse. Critics argue that such measures prioritize the sensitivities of certain groups over the fundamental right to free expression, and I would certainly agree with that criticism. Similarly, Western governments have faced accusations of limiting free speech to appease foreign powers, most notably China. The Chinese government's economic influence has led to self-censorship in industries ranging from Hollywood to academia. In the United States, for example, film studios have altered scripts to avoid offending Chinese censors, while universities have been reluctant to host speakers critical of the Chinese Communist Party due to fears of losing funding from Chinese students or partnerships. This dynamic illustrates how economic leverage can indirectly erode free speech as governments and institutions prioritize financial interests over democratic principles. Another area of concern is the limitation of free speech to accommodate the demands of the LGBT community, particularly those of the trans variety. While protecting individuals from discrimination and legitimate harassment may be a well-intentioned goal, some policies should be criticized for their gross overreach. In Canada, Bill C-16 amends the Canadian Human Rights Act to include gender identity and expression as protected categories. While the bill was intended to prevent discrimination, critics, including psychologist Jordan Peterson, rightfully argued that it could compel speech by requiring individuals to use preferred pronouns under threat of legal consequences. Although the law hasn't been widely enforced in this manner, It has been used several times, and its very existence has had a chilling effect on Canadian free speech and created a culture of fear when it comes to online discourse. These examples highlight a broader trend: the use of legal and social mechanisms to silence dissent under the guise of protecting specific groups. While the intentions behind such policies may vary, the outcome is always the same: an erosion of free speech that serves to consolidate government power and control and limit public debate. As governments seek to tighten their grip on citizens, the financial system has emerged as a critical battleground. The rise of digital currencies, particularly central bank digital currencies, also known as CBDCs, represent a significant shift in the relationship between individuals and the state. Unlike traditional cash, which allows for anonymous transactions, CBDCs are fully traceable and programmable, giving governments unprecedented control over financial flows. Proponents of CBDCs argue that they offer benefits such as increased efficiency, reduced fraud, and enhanced financial inclusion. However, critics warn, and I'm one of them, that they could be used to monitor and control citizens' economic activities. For example, a CBDC could be programmed to restrict purchases of certain goods or services deemed undesirable by the state, such as alcohol, firearms, or politically sensitive materials. It could also enable governments to impose negative interest rates, effectively forcing citizens to spend rather than save. One of the most alarming implications of CBDCs is their potential to facilitate economic deplatforming. In recent years, there have been numerous cases of individuals and organizations being denied access to financial services due to their political views. For instance, in 2022, the Canadian government invoked the Emergencies Act to freeze the bank accounts of individuals associated with the Freedom Convoy protest, which opposed COVID mandates. While the government justified this action as a means of restoring order, it raised concerns about the weaponization of the financial system against dissenters. With the CBDC, such measures could be implemented more easily and comprehensively, as the state would have direct control over the currency. The United States, the European Union, and other Western nations are actively exploring the development of CBDCs, often citing the need to compete with cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and China's digital yuan. However, the risk to personal liberty cannot be overstated. In a world where cash is eliminated and all transactions are mediated through a government-controlled digital currency, dissenters could be economically isolated at the click of a button. This prospect underscores the need for robust safeguards to protect individual freedoms in the digital age. It also calls into question if CBDCs can ever be justified or safely implemented. As it stands today, I would say no. The United Kingdom provides a stark example of how Western governments are expanding surveillance and control while limiting freedoms. In recent years, the UK has implemented policies that combine aggressive monitoring of digital activities with punitive measures against online speech, creating a chilling effect on free expression. One of the most controversial initiatives is the Investigatory Powers Act, often dubbed the Snoopers Charter. This legislation grants the government sweeping powers to intercept and store communications data, including emails, phone calls, and internet browsing histories. While the government claims these powers are necessary to combat terrorism and serious crime, critics argue that they represent a gross invasion of privacy. The European Court of Justice has repeatedly ruled that aspects of the law violate EU's privacy standards, yet the UK has continued to expand its surveillance capabilities. More recently, the UK government has proposed measures to extend its surveillance to cloud storage accounts. Under the draft Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, authorities could access data stored in cloud services, including those hosted outside the UK, and more alarmingly, would include accounts of non-UK citizens. How it would even be legally possible for the UK government to snoop inside US cloud accounts is beyond me, but that's what they're trying to do. This proposal has raised concern among privacy advocates who warn it could undermine encryption and expose sensitive information to government scrutiny. If implemented, this policy would further erode the right to privacy, as individuals and businesses would have little recourse to protect their data from state intrusion. At the same time, the UK has taken a hardline approach to online speech, particularly on social media platforms like X. In recent years, there have been numerous cases of individuals being arrested or imprisoned for tweets deemed offensive. Most notably, in 2018, Mark Meechan, known online as Count Dankula, was convicted of a hate crime for posting a satirical video in which he taught his dog to perform a Nazi salute. While the video was intended as a joke, Meechan was nevertheless arrested and fined £800, highlighting the subjective and punitive nature of hate speech laws. Similarly, in 2022, a man was jailed for 20 weeks for posting a meme mocking George Floyd's death, despite the post being shared in a private WhatsApp group. These cases illustrate the UK's willingness to criminalize speech under the pretext of combating hate, even when the content is satirical or shared in private messages. While proponents argue that such measures are necessary to prevent harm, because of course they do, critics, i.e., sane people, contend that they create a climate of fear where individuals are reluctant to express controversial opinions. This dynamic is particularly concerning given the UK's simultaneous expansion of surveillance, as it suggests a coordinated effort to monitor and punish dissent. Another dimension of increasing government control is the steady rise of taxation, which serves as both a mechanism for funding state activities and a tool for shaping behavior. In Western countries, tax rates have generally trended upward, driven by growing public debt, social welfare programs, and the cost of surveillance and enforcement. While taxation could be argued to be a necessary function of government, its expansion always comes at the expense of individual autonomy. And besides, when someone demands money of you under the threat of violence, it's hard to look at it as anything but extortion. In the United States, for example, the federal government has increased its reliance on income taxes, capital gains taxes, and other levies to fund its operations. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 allocated significant resources to the IRS to enhance tax enforcement, including the hiring of 87,000 new agents. While the stated goal is to target wealthy tax evaders, critics argue that it will inevitably lead to greater scrutiny of ordinary citizens. This trend is mirrored in other Western countries where tax authorities are leveraging technology and AI to monitor financial transactions and enforce compliance. Taxation is also being used as a tool for social engineering, with governments imposing sin taxes on activities deemed undesirable, such as smoking, drinking, and driving gas-powered vehicles. While these measures may have public health or environmental benefits, they also represent an expansion of state control over personal choices. In a world where digital currencies become the norm, governments could take this a step further by programming CBDCs to penalize certain behaviors, such as imposing higher taxes on purchases from politically disfavored businesses. The trends outlined in this video Limitations on free speech, the push for digital currencies, aggressive surveillance, and rising taxation paint a troubling picture of increasing government control in the West and around the world. While these measures are often ostensibly justified as necessary for security, inclusivity, economic stability, or whatever, they come at a significant cost to individual freedoms. The United Kingdom's policies in particular serve as a cautionary tale demonstrating how surveillance and repression can be combined to create a chilling effect on dissent. Addressing these challenges requires a renewed commitment to democratic principles, including robust protections for freedom of speech, privacy, and economic autonomy. Citizens must demand transparency and accountability from their governments, while also critically examining the narratives that are being used to justify expanding state power. Only through vigilance and active engagement can we hope to preserve the liberties that define Western societies and resist the ever-tightening grip of tyranny and control.